Imagine you're staring at a cashier in this really busy grocery store. You just want to buy a simple bottle of water.
Right. Just one thing.
Just one thing. And the cashier is looking at you, the line behind you is shifting, getting impatient, and suddenly your brain just completely crashes.
Oh, yeah. Total system failure.
Exactly. It's like a laptop with, I don't know, 50 browser tabs open, a video rendering, a system update running all at the exact same time. You open your mouth to ask for the water, but instead you panic, your wires cross, and you accidentally tell the cashier that you want to eat the internet.
Which is, yeah, it's terrifying in the moment.
You just stand there, totally mortified. Well, today we are doing a deep dive into a source text that argues that exact moment, that horrifying freeze-up brain crash moment, is actually not a failure at all.
No, it's actually the secret to mastering any new skill.
Right. So we're looking at a script today from a program called English Podcast 1.
Yeah, and at first glance, this looks like just a standard guide for language learners. But when you really dig into the underlying psychology, it presents, it's this incredible masterclass in dismantling the fear of looking foolish in public.
And that is the mission for you today. Whether you are actively trying to learn a new language, taking on some completely unfamiliar role at work, or maybe you're just trying to overcome that very human terror of speaking up in a big meeting.
Yeah, the stakes feel so high.
They really do. But this material completely flips the script on how we build confidence. Because usually learning is framed as this strict academic suffering, right? You sit with a dusty textbook, you memorize endless rules, and the goal is flawless execution.
Perfect grammar or nothing.
Right. But this source material just throws the textbook right out the window. It proposes that learning shouldn't be a math test. It should be a comedy club.
Which is such a profound paradigm shift. The source immediately identifies its target audience. Students facing exams, professionals hunting for jobs, basically anyone crippled by the pressure to perform, and it just systematically disarms that pressure.
How does it do that, neurologically speaking?
Well, in human psychology, there's this concept called the affective filter. So when we're anxious, our amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, it essentially hijacks our cognitive resources. It puts up a huge wall.
Like a defense mechanism.
Exactly. But by setting the expectation that mistakes are not just permitted, but, inherently funny, the text lowers that affective filter. It physically allows the prefrontal cortex to remain open and receptive to actually acquiring new information.
Okay, so to understand how to actually acquire that information, we first have to understand why we hit that wall in the first place. Like, why do we freeze at the grocery store?
Right.
The source identifies this massive roadblock right out of the gate, and it calls it the mental translation trap.
The translation trap. It is the universal bottleneck of early skill acquisition. It's basically the attempt to process new information entirely through the framework of the old information.
Yeah, and the source gives a really clear example of this. So you have a simple thought, I want water. But instead of just voicing that thought, your brain takes this exhausting detour.
Right. It's a whole process.
Yeah. First, you register the thought.
Yeah.
Second, you translate that thought into your native language. The text uses Somali as the example here. Third, you're rummaging around in your mental dictionary to find the English equivalents for those Somali words.
Which takes time.
So much time. And finally, you try to piece together those English words using English grammar rules, and you just slowly drag the sentence out of your mouth. By the time you do all that, the cashier has moved on, or you're just standing there in this awkward silence.
Because what's happening neurologically, there is a catastrophic drain on your working memory. So think of working memory like a narrow funnel.
Okay, a funnel.
Yeah, it can only hold and process a very limited amount of information at one time, typically about 4 to 7, chunks of data. When you attempt mental translation, you are forcing that funnel to hold the original concept, the vocabulary of language A, the syntax of language A, the vocabulary of language B, and the syntax of language B, all simultaneously.
Wow.
You are literally exceeding the physical neurological limits of your brain's processing power.
Which completely explains that hilarious image the source uses. It asks you to imagine trying to say, I'm going to market for buying things. And midway through, your brain just shuts down like a phone with no battery.
Exactly.
It's not a metaphor for feeling tired. It is a literal description of cognitive overload. The battery is completely drained.
And what's fascinating here is how the text normalizes this. That normalization is crucial. It points out a very grounding truth for the learner, which is even highly articulate. Native speakers experience this freeze.
Oh, totally.
Native speakers constantly pause mid-sentence, snap their fingers, and say, what's the word I'm looking for?
I do it all the time.
We all do. The freeze isn't a character flaw or some sign that you are uniquely terrible at learning. It's simply a mechanical indicator that your brain is processing a massive data set and just needs a microsecond to catch up.
That completely reframes the anxiety. I mean, if the freeze is just a mechanical limit of working memory, then the panic that usually follows the freeze is totally unnecessary.
Completely unnecessary.
But because we do panic when we freeze, we inevitably start making mistakes. And since those mistakes are unavoidable, the source argues we have to radically change our relationship with them. We have to rebrand them.
I love how they phrase this.
Right. The source calls mistakes teachers wearing funny clothes.
It's a brilliant psychological reframing, because when a system crashes due to cognitive overload, the brain enters a state of mild panic. And in that panic, it grasps for whatever neural pathways are most deeply ingrained.
Just grabbing at whatever feels safe.
Exactly. And this leads directly to the specific types of errors the source highlights.
Well, let's examine those errors, because the text unpacks 3 extremely common mistakes, and looking at the mechanics of why they happen is it's fascinating. The first one, the source points out, is time confusion.
Right.
The example given is a student saying, I am coming from school yesterday, instead of I came from school yesterday. The text treats this really lightly, saying English gets dizzy and wants to know, are you coming or did you already come? Choose one. But what is actually happening in the brain to cause that time travel collision?
So in linguistics, this is often driven by a phenomenon called proactive interference. Your brain has spent decades building massive, heavily reinforced neural highways for your native language's grammar.
Right, the stuff you don't even have to think about.
Exactly. When you are under the stress of speaking a new language, those old, deep pathways actively interfere with the fragile, newly forming pathways. If your native language doesn't conjugate verbs for time in the exact same way English does, your panicked brain just defaults to the deeply rutted highway. It grabs the present tense verb because it's familiar, even though it logically knows the event happened yesterday.
So the mistake isn't a lack of knowledge at all. It's a stress response, sending the signal down the wrong but, much more comfortable path.
Precisely.
That leads perfectly into the second mistake. The source highlights overthinking words, or basically adding completely unnecessary drama.
Yes.
The text uses the example of a learner saying, I am very, very, very hungry, when a simple I am hungry would do. The source notes that English doesn't need this movie scene level of drama.
Well, this is a classic overcompensation mechanism. When you're communicating in a new domain, your confidence in your own clarity is incredibly low. You are terrified the receiver, the cashier, the coworker, the audience. You're terrified they aren't understanding you.
Because you barely feel like you understand yourself.
Right. So to mitigate that fear, you introduce intense redundancy. You throw every vaguely related word you have acquired at the problem, just hoping one of them sticks. You are essentially using volume and repetition to mask your insecurity about precision.
We just empty the entire dictionary onto the table and hope the other person can assemble the pieces for us.
Exactly.
Okay, that brings us to the third mistake. The source outlines mixing languages. The example provided is a student saying, I went to the shop and I bought McCain things, slipping the Somali word for delicious right into the middle of the English sentence.
Right.
To explain why this is a mistake, the source uses an analogy. It claims English is like a clean room, and it absolutely hates having random foreign items thrown into it.
The clean room analogy is a very deliberate pedagogical tool.
Okay, let's unpack this, though, because I really have to challenge the source on this one. Calling English a clean room feels almost, factually incorrect.
How so?
Linguistically, isn't English famous for being a messy, chaotic hoarder of a language? We use karaoke from Japanese, schadenfreude from German, café from French. English steals from everyone all the time. So why is the source insisting we treat it like this pristine, sterile environment where mixing is forbidden? Is the clean room analogy really fair?
That's a great point. And your critique of English's history is entirely accurate. It is a linguistic melting pot. However, the source isn't teaching history here, right? It is engineering a learning environment.
Okay.
If a beginner is allowed to treat the target language like a messy room, they will constantly take the path of least resistance. The moment they hit a gap in their English vocabulary, they'll just plug it with a word from their native tongue.
Because it's easier and it avoids that battery drain we talked about earlier.
Precisely. But bypassing that struggle means you never signal to your brain that it needs to build a new connection. The artificial constraint of the clean room, forces unnecessary friction.
Direction.
Yeah. When you hit that vocabulary gap and you are forbidden from using your native language, you have to find a workaround using only the English tools you actually possess. Might have to describe the word you can't remember. That struggle, that very specific neurological friction, is the exact mechanism that triggers the brain to forge a new neural pathway.
Oh, wow.
The constraint breeds the capability. The clean room rule exists purely to prevent you from using your native language as a crutch.
So you have to learn the strict boundaries of the room before you earn the right to start decorating it with loanwords.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. So if we're trying to avoid the massive battery drain of mental translation, and we're embracing the friction of the clean room without panicking over the inevitable mistakes, how do we actually rewire our thinking?
Well, this is where we move from theory to practical neurological rewiring.
Because the source provides a highly actionable 3-step method for thinking directly in the new language. Step 1 in the text is label your world.
Right.
It instructs the learner to physically look around their current environment and simply state what they see. Door, table, phone, chair. I mean, it seems incredibly rudimentary, almost childlike.
But it's rudimentary by design. By
Yeah.
looking at a physical door and saying the word door, you are attempting to create a direct semantic mapping.
Direct semantic mapping.
Yes. So think of your brain's language center like a really dense forest. Your native language is an 8-lane paved highway connecting the concept of a door to your native word for it. When you try to learn English through translation, you drive down that highway, stop, and then try to build a tiny bridge over to the English word.
Which, again, takes way too much time and working memory.
Yes. But by pointing at the physical object and speaking the new word, you are ignoring the paved highway entirely. You are picking up a machete and hacking a brand new direct trail through the woods from the visual cortex straight to the English vocabulary center.
I love that.
It's slow and it's clumsy at first, but it establishes a direct link that requires zero translation.
Hacking that direct trail brings us to step 2. Talk to yourself.
Yeah.
The source is very serious about this. It tells the learner to narrate their daily life out loud. I am waking up. I am brushing my teeth. I am drinking tea.
Yeah.
And then step 3 naturally follows. Use short sentences. The text specifically advises, don't try to be Shakespeare. Just focus on I am happy or I am tired.
Which is basically an exercise in building structural foundation. You cannot paint the walls of a house before you pour the concrete. Short sentences are the concrete.
Okay, but I want to push back on the environment the source suggests for this foundational work. There is a specific quote from this section that really stood out to me. Confidence is built in silence before it is shown in public.
A great line.
It is, but the idea is that you narrate your life while alone in your bathroom or your kitchen, but isn't language inherently social? If the entire purpose of this endeavor is to communicate with other human beings, won't practicing in a sterile, isolated vacuum just cause me to panic the second a real, unpredictable human being talks back to me?
This is a very intuitive concern, but it actually misunderstands how the nervous system acquires new skills.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Practicing in silence is not about simulating a conversation. It is about establishing psychological safety. When you are alone in your kitchen narrating your morning routine, your affective filter is completely lowered. Your amygdala is calm because there is zero social threat. No one is judging your grammar, no one is waiting for you to finish your sentence, and there is no consequence for failure.
So you're basically removing the cognitive load of social anxiety so you can dedicate 100% of your working memory to just language processing.
Exactly. Fluency is not just an academic achievement. It is a state of the nervous system. You have to lay down those initial neurological tracks in a low-stakes environment.
Because if you try to do it all at once...
Right. If you try to build the foundation while simultaneously managing the intense social pressure of a live conversation, the system crashes. Confidence built in silence is the prerequisite for resilience in public. You need the muscle memory to fall back on when the adrenaline hits.
That distinction between academic knowledge and nervous system regulation is just huge, because eventually the source makes it clear that you do have to step out of the silence.
You can't hide forever.
Right. You cannot stay in the bathroom forever. You have to test the system in the wild. The source introduces real-world role-play scenarios to bridge this gap, and importantly, they are kept incredibly brief, maintaining that short sentence philosophy.
And notice how the text structures these initial public interactions.
Yeah.
They're purely transactional.
Right. So situation 1 is at a shop. Hello, how much is this? $5? Okay, I will take it. Situation 2 is passing a friend. Hey, how are you? I'm good, and you? I'm good too.
Simple.
The goal isn't to express complex philosophical ideas. The goal is simply to execute a transaction and survive the interaction without the system crashing.
Which completely lowers the barrier for success.
Yeah.
You're defining victory as a functional outcome, buying the water, acknowledging a friend, rather than some display of flawless linguistic mastery.
But the true genius of the source material, and this is where it returns to that comedy club mindset we talked about, is in the third scenario it presents. It doesn't offer another smooth, successful transaction. It introduces what it calls a funny mistake moment. It imagines a learner attempting a transaction, getting their wires crossed, and accidentally announcing, I want to eat the internet.
A classic proactive interference or semantic mapping error. The brain reached for use, grabbed eat, and delivered it with total confidence.
And the source's reaction to this error is just a little smiley face and the note, no, you don't eat internet. See, mistakes are funny, but they help you improve.
That's perfect.
The psychology of placing that specific joke right at the climax of the real-world application section is brilliant. When you are standing in line, terrified to speak, your brain is projecting apocalyptic consequences.
Oh, totally. You imagine the cashier laughing, people recording you, completely losing your dignity.
Yes. But by highlighting eating the internet, the source forces you to look at the actual worst-case scenario.
It completely defangs the fear.
It really does, because the worst thing that happens is you say something slightly surreal, the cashier might chuckle, you correct yourself, and the world just keeps spinning. The apocalypse you were terrified of is actually just a momentary, highly solvable absurdity. When you realize that the consequence of failure is just a mild comedy routine, the fear loses its grip on your amygdala.
Which brings us to the ultimate thesis of the entire text. In the final motivational section, the source delivers a line that synthesizes everything we've discussed today. Broken English spoken is better than perfect English hidden.
Broken English spoken is better than perfect English hidden. That is the core philosophy.
It is a phenomenal operating principle because it reminds us of the fundamental purpose of the skill. Communication exists for connection, not for grammatical perfection.
Right.
We become so paralyzed by the fear of violating the clean room rules that we forget the entire point of the room is to invite someone else inside. Every single individual who has ever mastered a secondary skill, every diplomat speaking a second language, every CEO who had to learn public speaking, every expert in a new field began in a state of high cognitive load and deep embarrassment. They started with system crashes.
They started by accidentally trying to eat the internet.
Precisely. The singular difference between the person who achieves fluency and the person who remains stagnant is that the successful person tolerated the discomfort of being imperfect. They valued the human connection, or the end goal, more than they valued protecting their pride.
They hacked the messy trail through the woods instead of waiting around for someone to pave a perfect highway.
Exactly.
So let's bring all of these mechanisms together. We have excavated some incredibly powerful tools from the script today. The fear of sounding foolish isn't a personality flaw. It is a temporary limit of your working memory.
Yes.
The mistakes you make under pressure aren't failures. They are proactive interference, showing you exactly where the old pathways are clashing with the new ones. Direct semantic mapping labeling your world bypasses the battery drain of translation.
Right.
And most importantly, creating a safe environment to build muscle memory in silence is what actually allows your nervous system to regulate itself in public.
Because the expectation of flawless execution on day one is a myth, and it's a uniquely paralyzing one.
It is, and to break that paralysis, the source ends with a direct physical challenge to the learner, and it is a challenge we want to pass directly to you. The text asks for an immediate practical application of everything we've discussed. It instructs you to say out loud, wherever you are right now, I am not afraid to make mistakes.
And crucially, it demands escalation.
It does. It tells you to say it again, but louder. Say it especially if someone is watching you. Because that physical act of speaking through the discomfort is the only way to prove to your amygdala that you are actually safe.
Yeah.
You have to take the confidence you have been quietly building in silence and let it collide with the real world. You have to prove to yourself that the system won't crash just because people are looking.
It is the ultimate test of valuing action over optics, which I think leads to a much broader application of everything we've explored today.
How so?
Well, we have been examining these cognitive mechanisms through the lens of language acquisition, right?
Yeah.
But the psychology of the mental translation trap and the fear of the messy middle, that applies to almost every endeavor in life.
Absolutely.
The desire to hide our broken, incomplete efforts prevents us from ever reaching fluency in any discipline. So the lingering thought we really want to leave you with today is this. We know that broken action is vastly superior to perfect inaction. So beyond language, what other skills, what bold ideas, or what talents are you currently keeping hidden from the world just because they aren't flawless yet?
That's a great question.
And if you stopped waiting for perfection, what is one undeniably imperfect, broken step you could take today?